basically, this message is about Genesis chapter 36, verses 6 right to the end. In it, we had a collection of names. And names in the book of Genesis showed the history. Whatever people were going through, they named them the name of what they were going through at the time. For example, if you were getting a stubbed toe while your wife was delivering a child, there's the name, stubbed toe. Can you imagine calling somebody, hey, stubbed toe, come over here? But that is exactly what they did. And this is why the names were inserted on all the written commentary that was done. We finish off today with verses 40 to 43. Let's see what we can get out of this. And these are the names of the chiefs that came of Esau, according to their families and their places by their names. Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Jetheth, Chief Aholibama, Chief Elah, Chief Pinon, Chief Kenaz, Chief Timan, Chief Mibzar. I'll tell you, these are weird names according to our English-speaking people. Chief Magdiel and Chief Iram. These be the chiefs of Edom, according to their habitations in the land of their possessions. He is Esau, the father of the Edomites. You see, we start off Genesis chapter 36 with a bunch of chiefs. Then, placed right in the middle, we have a list of kings. It's almost Moses was trying to warn the readers the dangers of having kings. And then came the chiefs again. Let's unpack this. And these are the names of the chiefs that came of Esau, according to their families, after their places, by their names, is how the reader is introduced to the Edomite government of chiefdoms. It's a made-up word by me, chiefdom. After the monarchy ceased, yes, Edom had a monarchy. After the monarchy ceased, the government in Edom was by chiefs. In the King James Version, it's called dukes. They had dukedoms. These chiefs did not govern the whole nation of the Edomites. Now, there is a first. What? You're a chief? But you're a chief over a certain region. Let's continue and see what's happening here. These chiefs did not govern the whole nation of the Edomites, but they were chiefs in their respective families, in their places or districts where they governed, and to which they gave their names. In fact, if you want to call it something, it was a feudal system. Feudal system is where earls and dukes and duked it out among each other, and one ran a fortress here and one ran a fortress there, and surrounding those fortresses were the subjects, and they all owed their allegiance to the earl or duke or lord. Now, from verses 40 to 43, names of prominent chiefs are listed. Because it was assumed that no male ever was in a position of authority, female names, by most commentaries, were automatically dismissed and were said to only be names of places, which coincidentally happened to be named the same. If it was names of places, why call it Chief so-and-so, Chief so-and-so? If I was a ruler in Hamilton, I wouldn't be called Chief Hamilton. I'd probably be called Chief Bernie or Chief Merton. That didn't make sense to me. So I decided to do a little bit more studying. Now, even in those ancient days, women often knew how to wield power most effectively. And 11 chiefs are listed, but one of them was a woman. And let's see if we can figure out who that one was. So the first 3 chiefs are Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, and Chief Jetheth. Timnah meant divided portion. In other words, he divided portions out. See, look at that. Look at that. These names are also nicknames that stuck. Like Saul in the New Testament became Paul, and we know him as Paul the Apostle. But in those days, it was the same. Where do you think they got it from? So Timnah meant divided portion, and he had a town named after him. Alva meant his rising up, and Jetheth meant nail or tent pin. You know, most of them lived in tents, didn't they? And when you were named tent pin, it's like being called pillar of society. It symbolized stability. The next 3 are Chief Aholibama. Do you recognize that name? Chief Elah and Chief Pinon. Aholibama, as mentioned previously, was one of Esau's wives and had a place over which she ruled named after her. Yes, after she ruled, there was a place called Uholibama. That means OH instead of AH. And then we have Elah, meaning oak. Ooh. And Pinon meant pearl. After this, there are 3 more. Chief Kenaz, Chief Teman, and Chief Mibzar. Kenaz meant hunt or hunting, which was already encountered in one of Eliphaz's sons. He also had one with a similar name meaning hunter. Next is Teman, meaning the south. And Teman was a place where one of Job's counselors came from. It meant defense or fortified fortress. Then we have the 10th chief. His name was Magdiel, meaning declaring of God. And the final chief was Iram, meaning high heap or citizen of a city. You see, chapter 36 closes with, these are the chiefs of Edom, according to their habitations in the land of their possession. This is Esau, the father of the Edomites. Now the aforementioned chiefs were both from Edom and Seir, all lords of their own regions. Wherever an important decision affecting all of Edom was to be made, all the chiefs came together and made their decision by consensus. Do you see? Do you see that? You see, there was an ancient kind of democracy developing, see? There was a consensus, and by the consensus, decisions were made. Apparently, this form of government proved much more effective than having a king rule all of Seir. And this form of government serve to represent the interests of the people and not just the will of one man. The truth is that any system of government that does not include God is doomed to failure. In the United States, they used to have a motto, one nation under God. Then they threw God out. I'm not saying anything more about that. So as mentioned before, perhaps Moses was warning the readers about the flaws of having a monarchy like all the other nations have. Do you realize Moses laid out carefully what should be the credentials of a king in Deuteronomy 17:14 to 29? 14 to 20, sorry. Deuteronomy 17:14 to 20. If I were you, I would check it out. Centuries later, Samuel, the prophet, under Samuel the prophet, the Israelites did indeed, and get this, it's almost the same wording. What did they demand? Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations have. Ooh. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, Samuel, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. That's in 1 Samuel 8:5 and 19 to 20. Now the king did not fulfill at all what Moses laid out in Deuteronomy 17:14 to 20, as you can well imagine. Now, if the truth be told, the people of Israel were too lazy to make rational decisions on their own. That's why they wanted a king. Blind obedience. Well, to close this chapter, I just want to say, the people of Israel did not heed God's warnings again and again. And before we point our finger at Israel, we should remember we often don't either, do we?